Basically, I failed my first 7 companies. I did sell 3 out of the first 7, but they're small exits. So for me, it was a failure because I had ambitions to build a company that was worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And so going from failure to failure, I learned what doesn't work. And trust me, I was not failing on purpose. Every single failure was very painful, and I didn't want it to happen again. When it was the 4th, the 5th, I was like, this has got to be the last one. It's too painful, but they keep happening and happening. And so I used that to start investing because I was seeing other entrepreneurs doing the same mistakes as me, because I'd done so many mistakes in so many different startups. And so I knew, okay, you're gonna fail. And if I told you would not believe me, but I know you're gonna fail, so I'm not gonna bet on you. But once in a while, I would find a founder who was navigating all the mistakes way better than me. I don't know why. And I thought, wow, they're doing it, they're gonna succeed. And that's how I started investing. That's why my first 3 angel investments, 2 of them turned into beautiful exits. 1 turned into a terrible loss, but 2 out of 3 under 25. That was exceptional, and that's what got my investing career started.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Raise&Exit podcast. Today we have via France our guest, Gabriel Jarrosson, the founder of Lobster Capital. I'm excited to have you here, Gabriel. You play a very different game from other fund founders. Because you're not going and paying for the top 1%, you're playing for the top 2% of the top 1% of companies. And I think that gives you a different lens of how to professionally critique investment opportunities, but then I think also how to say no. And that I think is one of the biggest gaps that we've seen in our interviews with other guests and in my professional experience, is that founders sometimes don't know how to say no to themselves as they're going and pursuing capital. So I'd love to dive into that as a theme for today, but in the moment, please introduce yourself a little bit about your background, and then we'll dive into our questions today.
Well, hello, Edgar, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here for this conversation. So as you said, as you might hear, I'm trying to hide it, but I'm from beautiful Paris. I'm based in San Francisco. I am the general partner of Lobster Capital, which is a YC-focused fund investing in the top 2% of YC startups. So YC accepts less than 1%. That's why 2% of the top 1%. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I'm a dad. I'm a husband, and I'm love lots of things. But by day, I'm a venture capitalist.
I think that is really cool. And by your former life, you're also a serial founder. And as you've kind of acknowledged, right, it's not that every single thing that you've touched has turned into gold. You were very public, actually, about your lessons from the failures that you had along the way. And I'd actually like to start with that topic with you today, which is how much should founders account for failure in their own planning of the business that they're building?
Wow, I love this. I mean, failure is probably inevitable. I think it's, unless you're extremely lucky and you succeed on the first trial. But that's the part that people don't realize. You start a business, and of course, you got to wake up in the morning and think it's going to work. And most likely it isn't. So that's something you got to learn. And I think the entrepreneurs that make it usually are the ones that are able to keep going despite, like, going from failure to failure. Could be in the same business or starting new businesses, and keep always having this energy to still keep going. That's why you should start a business that you're passionate about, by the way, because it's going to get tough and you need to start again and just keep going. So expect failure. It's part of the process. I think you probably can go almost nowhere without failing at least a little bit.
So I'd like to expand on that, because something that I heard in a conversation years ago that has stuck with me is that the best founders use failure as a signal. So they can start seeing that we're already about to fail, and they use that to pivot. Can you kind of give me, either from your own experience or from some of the YC companies that you've worked with, where seeing the signs of pending failure is actually the pathway to success?
Oh, absolutely. I believe this so much. That's an amazing question, by the way. I mean, I'll give you an example from my personal life and then one from YC. Basically, I failed my first 7 companies, right? I did sell 3 out of the first 7, but they're small exits. So for me, it was a failure because I had ambitions to build a company that was worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And because you sell them for less, it is a failure. And so going from failure to failure, I learned what doesn't work. And trust me, I was not failing on purpose. Every single failure was very painful, and I didn't want it to happen again. When it was the fifth, I was like, this has got to be the last one. It's too painful. But they keep happening and happening. And so I used that to start investing because I was seeing other entrepreneurs doing the same mistakes as me, because I'd done so many mistakes in so many different startups. And so I knew, okay, you're going to fail. I'm not going to tell you because that would be, you're going to find out by yourself. And if I told you, you would not believe me. But I know you're going to fail, so I'm not going to bet on you. But once in a while, I would find a founder who was navigating all the mistakes way better than me. I don't know why. And I thought, wow, they're doing it. They're going to succeed. And that's how I started investing. That's why my first 3 angel investments, 2 of them turned into beautiful exits. 1 turned into a terrible loss. But 2 out of 3, as a beginner, and I was very
you're
young,
already beating the market with 2 out of 3.
Exactly,
Gabriel.
and I was under 25.
Yeah,
that was exceptional, and that's what got my investing career started. So that's from my experience how failure helped me become more successful. And for YC and for entrepreneurs in general, I mean, something to take into consideration, or how you can apply this philosophy, is if you're not growing at least 10% per month, with real numbers, not from $1 to $1.10 and then to $1.21, from thousands and ideally tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you're not growing at least 10% a month, you're failing. So that's how the best entrepreneurs pivot to something that works. It's product market fit. If you're not growing fast enough, it means you're still in the idea maze. That's what YC calls the idea maze. You're not out. You still haven't found product market fit. You need to pivot. Otherwise, you're going to slowly fail your way to bankruptcy.
Oh, so you just went right into an area that I wanted to cover with you, because
awesome.
What I find is a couple of things that is here. Like, a bit of the history for me is the evolution of investing into companies has changed. And then I would say the past 2 years, especially because of AI and the traction of AI, I would say call it tempo, or expectations of tempo have changed. So play a bit of contrarian with yourself, and I would say with much of this audience. When is revenue the wrong signal for your future success?
Wow. When is revenue the wrong signal for the future success? I mean, there's always revenue and revenue. So if it's the wrong kind of revenue, if it's revenue that's not sustainable, if it's revenue that's taking a lot of hand-holding but it's not scalable for your future customers, if it's revenue in the wrong geographic, if it's short-term revenue that's going to churn and you know it, there's thousands of ways where revenue is not good. So but that's very interesting, the point that you're making. For everything, there's revenue and revenue. And I say this to a lot of my LPs, of my investors in my fund, is there's YC startup and there's YC startup. You put every YC startup in the same bucket, and that's not true. That's why I come in and filter. So in the same way you think of revenue is just dollars, well, there's revenue and there's revenue. So all of those things that I mentioned could take you in the wrong way if you're passionate about self-serve, but all of this revenue is big enterprise and big, a lot of custom built, and you're not happy with that. That's wrong revenue. There's been a lot of talk about AI tools that get a lot of revenue at the beginning because everyone tries for a few months, and then there's a new better tool that comes out, and everyone churns. And so if your revenue churns in 3 months and it's not sustainable, it's only on monthly plans, and there's no real usage, if people pay but they don't use, they're going to churn. So you have revenue, but that's not good revenue. So there's plenty of examples like this.
I think it's so good what you're talking about. There's revenue and there's revenue, right? Like, I think context matters so much, because if we kind of take a look at it this way, right? I almost wonder, and this is like talking openly with you here, right? I think founders, and to some extent, I'd say investors and funds, need to go and take a look at that. What revenue are you actually going and getting? There's that early traction revenue of, hey, I went to a dozen, 30 friends, industry colleagues. They tried it out. Oh, Gabriel, this is a fantastic product. Like, go, 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 go. Then there's what I call unsolicited revenue, right? Like, this is like, they don't know you and they're buying your solution and they're paying for it. But then the next thing that comes after that is my cost of acquiring revenue declining or flat? Right? And I think not enough is being given consideration to that. Like, I'm from the analytics era where I want to know the breakdown of the revenue. Don't just tell me you grew from $1 million to $3 million. I want to know what is leading that $2 million in growth and how much of that $2 million is going to stick around 6, 12, 24, 36 months from now. So what's your perspective on the time value of revenue, building on our conversation here?
It's interesting. I want to give another example. I recently turned down investing in one of the best companies of one of the recent batch. Probably top 5 of the batch in terms of revenue. And then I asked him, okay, who are your customers? Where do they come from? And it turns out 60% of the customers were in the current batch, like batchmates, which is a very regular, like a criticism you hear about YC quite often. They only sell to each other. And it's 90% of the time wrong, but sometimes it's true, like this one. And that's already not great. But then I ask him, okay, you want to sell to the next batches, I'm guessing, like you want to make this a repeat thing. He's like, yeah, sure. I'm like, okay, how do you go and target the next batch where you're not inside the batch yourself? You're not here, in the same room with them. And his answer was very vague. Oh, we do this, we do that. Like, I don't know. And I thought to myself, that's not a plan at all. Like, you don't know. And so you're not going to get the next batch as customers. And so your company is going to stop growing now. And so I passed on investing, even though it was, again, one of the best companies. So, sharing that. Now, revenue timing, I mean, probably, dollars, money is money and you want it as fast as possible in your bank account. There's a big thing in startup where people talk about projected ARR. So you take your monthly revenue, maybe it's a subscription, but it's paid monthly, and you multiply it by 12.
Yeah.
And so you have to be aware of that when companies tell you we do ARR. You have to follow up like, okay, what ARR exactly are we talking about? If some investors just don't know the detail there. And again, you want it to be sustainable. So, cohorts, retentions, people who have them, and if they're good, it's always included in your documentation. So if it's not, it's either it's too soon, maybe that's okay, maybe, or they're actually bad. That's also possible. So, those are things to look out for, I think.
Yeah, it's because what you're also pointing to, and it's something that you said earlier, which I thought was fascinating about having this like monthly compounding, right? Like a monthly CAGR, not like an annual CAGR, right? So it's like compound annual growth rate. So CMGR, compound monthly growth rate, right?
Yep.
So if we look at that, and how do you see founders that you've worked with, or even for yourself, where you've been your own ceiling, like you've actually capped yourself at the potential for your company? Like how do you balance that? Because that's really hard, right? It's like ego and pragmatism rolled into one, and knowing how fast you can grow versus what is a responsible expectation of growth.
You're pointing out probably the number one hardest thing ever in the entire world of startups. I think this is the very, very final boss, the very last level, is how are you not a ceiling to yourself for growing your company? And it's actually, I was hearing your question in the context of a company already doing 5-10 million and who wants to go at 100 million.
Yeah.
But actually, it's also true when you're doing zero and you want to get to just $1,000 of MRR. Usually, because there's only you in the company, you're also your own ceiling. It's a different problem, but you're always the source. That's why startup investing, especially at seed, is a lot about people as well, because it's a lot about who's the founder. So, I mean, it's very difficult because you've got to sort of challenge yourself all the time, and that's what I've learned to do, and that's what you were referring to a little bit earlier on, the growth mindset and the founders, how they evolve and how they build a business. You probably are your biggest ceiling, but you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
And so how do you create a way for you to sort of put everything back into question all the time and to look at yourself in the mirror and to reassess everything you're doing, even what was working before? And how do you learn to cope with failure and to pivot? Like, those things are really hard. Like, it took me years, and I don't want to pretend like I'm a pro at it. I'm doing them perfectly, but I do assess quite often. Okay, where are my blind spots? What's slowing me down that I don't know, that I haven't seen, and it's a very difficult sort of gymnastics to do.
Yeah.
But a very healthy one. If you're able to do it, it's a very healthy one. Sorry, go ahead.
No. It's totally good, because what you're kind of pointing to is like, look, it's like, where are you your own ceiling, right? Like, where are you kind of putting your own blinders on yourself? And I think what this also kind of goes to is like one of my opening conversation, which is, how do you as a founder know when to say no? And I think that's a really difficult question that I would kind of go and put there, because it can apply to scaling your company. It can be to go and hiring the next talent to join your team. It could be going and raising money. And this kind of ties to me. When should you say no to your plan to raise money or sell versus when should you be ready to raise or ready to sell? And that's a huge conflict. I'd love your perspective on that. Since you've sold 3 times, you've invested even more frequently. How do you as a founder know to say no to yourself?
It's also something I think fascinating and extremely important. It's probably not the final boss, but it's close. It's like a few levels before. But learning to say no in general in life is just so important, especially in the world that we live in, where you get more and more and more and more stuff that needs you and your time. You need to learn to say no to your phone and to turn off all your notifications. You need to learn to say no to your emails. And there's very few people that do that, but like you should be able to have several hours a day where your emails are closed and you're not interrupted. You should learn to say no to, I don't know, I've stopped drinking 2 years ago, and it amazes me how much society pushes alcohol on us. Like it's a normal thing, but it's actually something that alters your mind. It's bad for your health. It's bad for your brain. Anyway, it's dangerous if you end up driving. Like alcohol is pretty terrible. So there's lots of things that you can learn to say no to, and you should say no to procrastination, to spending your day on YouTube or X or, LinkedIn or whatever. So it is very difficult. I am lucky in a sense that my day job as an investor is also to say no to startups. Because again, 99.9% of the time you say no. So I sort of have more practice than most people saying no to stuff, but you've got to say no. And now on LinkedIn, you get offered a coffee or a Zoom call 5 times a day if you're lucky to have a little bit of an audience on LinkedIn. And so if you don't say no, if you say yes to every inbound, you don't have time to do anything else. And so you have to learn to say no to inbound as well. So saying no is everywhere. You've got to learn it. And that's just like I was very practical and you're more philosophical, but it's linked. You learn to say no in your daily life, then you learn to say no on the bigger stuff. I personally am the type of person that has a new startup idea every week that I want to build. Yeah. You have to learn to say no to that. And again, it took me that's why I started 7 companies in 8 years, by the way. That's way too many. But I didn't know how to say no. Every time I had a new idea, I had to do it. So there's 1 year that I had 3 startups at the same time, which is the perfect recipe to fail all of them. So you have to learn to say no. And of course, I'm married, but people have to learn to say no to Tinder. And every time you fight with your boyfriend, girlfriend, instead of fixing and patching things up, you just go and swipe the next person because it's just easier. I don't know. I think we live in a world. Your brain is not trained to take its time to think, things slowly and thoroughly, and to take the right decision. You're trained on being impulsive. You need food, it gets at your door in 5 minutes. You need a new computer, it gets delivered by Amazon in less than 24 hours. So yes, I think every entrepreneur needs to learn to slow down, needs to learn to think and just do. Something that I learned a couple years ago, but recently, like 2 years ago, do nothing. Just do nothing. I'm a super busy guy, right? I'm a super busy guy. I love it. I run a business. I always have 10,000 things to do. But who among the listeners spent 1 hour doing nothing, not being on your phone, nothing with a pen and paper in your thoughts for 1 hour, at least once a week? Who does that? Well, no
I think it's a dying practice because, like, as you were talking, right, I just got reminded so much by Daniel Kahneman's work, right, thinking fast, thinking slow. But what I'm realizing is it's like you got to figure out when you're doing fast, thinking slow, and when you're doing slow, thinking fast. And I think what you're kind of pointing to, because look, the reality is, if you're a founder or an entrepreneur or a business owner, you're a little bit crazy. Right? You're willing to go and take on a set of accountability, a set of responsibility. You're either willing to take on like giant industries because you're like, no, I think I can do this better than that $10 billion company over there. Right? Yeah. And I think what you're kind of just pointing to right here is a portion that is not thought well enough by people, like people pacing themselves, knowing how to step back, right? Like to your point of like, hey, I got to say no to a whole bunch of good ideas and maximize the idea that I have right now. I think that is a struggle for a lot of founders that is there.
It is. It is. And again, like if you're an entrepreneur, you're, like you said, probably a little bit crazy, but 99% of what you're building comes from here,
Yes.
between your two ears. And so how do you treat your brain? You never stop and pause and reflect, and every time you have 5 minutes, you take up your phone and you're on TikTok. Like you're giving cigarettes to your brain. That's not good. Your brain should be healthy, should know how to read. Like, you know how many people tell me I'm not able to read a book? It's too slow. Like they open a book and after 10 minutes they're fidgeting. They can't sit in a place. They're like, I got to do something. I had an idea. I got to reply to that email. You know, learn to be able to read a book for at least 1 hour, maybe 2 hours. And again, like that's something, 2 years ago, I was not able to do that. So, well, reading, yes, I've read for the past 10 years, but do nothing for an hour. 2 years ago, I was not able to do that, and it's awesome. So, that's a good thing. And so you have to learn to say no to everything else. Just say yes to yourself, like to your brain, to your thoughts, and that's it.
This so went a completely in a different direction than I thought when I kind of was like putting it together. But I think what you're pointing to so much is that aspect of it, right? Like what I'm just listening to you, what I'm going and realizing is like that catalyst, right? Like the idea for your business came out of your mind. Yeah. How are you making sure that you're nurturing that original aha, that that eureka moment that was the catalyst for your business is there? Because I don't know, this is my takeaway in this conversation. I'd love to know if people who are listening to this after as well, like where have you put a damper on yourself by getting too much into the doing against that brilliant idea that you had, versus making sure that you have enough of a balance between allowing that creativity to be building on top of what has already been built, while also saying no to the distractions that are there. It's so, as you said, philosophical and existential. So what would you say is that parting recommendation on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, I would say most entrepreneurs work for their business and they don't work on their business. So you created something, but then you become a prisoner of your own golden cage because you've got bills to pay and projects and whatever. And so you're just running. And something that I realized is you can work on your business, and ultimately you should work in a way that the business doesn't need you.
When do you do that? Because that's I think is the biggest trap. That's all the way from like 18-year-old founders to 80-year-old founders that are still running their companies. What are some signs that you've seen?
You do it all the time.
Right, but the on versus in. The on versus in. When should you start having that balance of power shifting to on the business versus in the business? What are some signals that you would use?
I think you should do it from day one. I mean, the first few weeks
of the first
customer is you, but the rest already you should do it in a way that the business doesn't need you. And the goal is not to necessarily extract yourself from the business and retire, but to have systems in place, to have time to think about the business itself rather than being the one doing all the work. So I think you should think about this almost day one.
I think that is really interesting. And what I'm kind of also picking up and speaking with you is that, look, we have so many, we started talking about revenue, right? Like that is kind of called default measure used by so many people. And then we realize that there's components of revenue that we really should be looking at. But if I'm exploring this whole notion here, right, of like being on the business versus in the business, being able to go and say no, what I'm also hearing is I think my encouragement to others, and also like a better realization for myself, is to go and actually track metrics. Like, what is my revenue metric that I can go and use? Is it's revenue and it's revenue, right? Like, what's my metric? And my metric that actually tells me that I'm actually achieving what I want to be able to go and achieve. And that's what I'm kind of getting from this conversation with you right now.
And what am I spending time on? Is this really value add? Could I give this to someone else? Is this where I want to spend my time? Is this what really is growing the business? It's probably 80-20. It's probably 20% of what you do that's giving you 80% of what you want to achieve. So you can look at that.
Oh, I think it's so great. And I think there's a whole like existential expansion out of this that I hope people get for themselves and take to others. I do want to go to one other topic that I thought was something you could provide a different perspective on than maybe anybody else I could have on the show. And it kind of goes to your focus that you have on the top 2% of the top less than 1%. by focusing on Y Combinator. So years ago, I did a lot of foundational research into where competition comes from for the establishment, right? And two things that I went and learned was that they stopped innovating at the pace that a critical mass of customers wanted, or they had bad experience. But every once in a while, you just went and had a new want or need that emerged. And as you are working with Y Combinator companies, where do you notice you are leading towards? The people that are evolving on what's already there with a better version or better experience? Or are you noticing that the real value amplifiers are in the builders of the new status quo?
Wow. I love questions like this because it's the very first time I get asked this, and it's a really cool question. Thank you. I would probably tend to say both, which is maybe a little bit disappointing. I can tell you that YC has very famous examples of both, and I see both in YC. One thing I want to note is that recently, with the advances of AI in the last 3 years that I think no one has ignored or no one can ignore, YC has really been pushing the idea of you can take any old dusty industry, come in with AI native vertical solutions and create, probably 1,000 new billion-dollar companies, the billion-dollar company of trucking scheduling and of, order tracking for pharmacies and of medical billing and blah, blah, blah. Like there's probably 1,000 or 10,000 verticals where you can build a $1 billion AI native vertical software, a new solution. And so recently, there's been a lot of sort of AI brought to this boring industry, like, trucking, medical, etc. That being said, there's a lot of super innovative companies that came out of YC. We can just think of Airbnb, which is one of their biggest success. And everyone thought they were crazy. Everyone thought, going to sleep in a stranger's house? Are you insane? I would never do that. And probably I would have said that at the time. Honestly, if I'm completely honest with you, I'm not sure I would have believed in them. I wish, but I'm not sure I would have believed in them. So that's very new. Reddit is pretty unique in its genre and pretty new. It's a YC company. Coinbase was not the very first crypto wallet, but it was one of the very first, very, very ahead of its time, very new. And the idea of taking this blockchain complexity and making it super easy as sending an email, I think was the pitch at the beginning. This was new and was genius, and it worked out really well. So I think there's both. YC has this thing going for them, which is insanely amazing, which is probably one of the main reasons why I invest there is YC is the best magnet for the best, most ambitious founders in the world. If you really are the most ambitious founder who wants to build the biggest company there is, you want to go and do it at YC because YC will give you a disproportionate advantage. And so I get to meet with these people and sometimes invest in them. And those kind of super ambitious, very goal-driven super achievers, oftentimes they want to create something new. Yeah. It's their type. And I have many examples from recent batches of people who really start things that have not existed before. It arguably might be harder to invest in those things because if it's, you're doing AI for the trucking industry, if you do it well, everyone knows there's a huge need. There's no question it's going to work. Yeah. The other ones, it's usually a hit or a miss. Like it could do great or it could fail. That's my job as an investor. But also, if it does work, potentially it could be even better. Potentially it could be even bigger because it's a new thing entirely. So it's also probably a little bit more interesting. Like that's why you do this job. That's why you wake up in the morning, because sometimes you see some of those projects, especially at YC, where you're really at the very, very edge of innovation, in the entire world. And you see some of them and you're like, damn, that's so cool. Like that's why I wake up every day. So it's both. That's
so good. It brings me to my last question for you today, which is, the audience here is for a broad range of founders, including ones that are going and doing things that might not be at the grandiose scale of some Y Combinator companies. So
maybe someday.
So here's my question, right? As any founder, when is it responsible to yourself as a founder to use Y Combinator as a North Star or as an aspiration? And when is it a crutch?
I think it's almost always a North Star. And something that I think is very interesting about YC that few people realize, I didn't realize this before, YC's playbook is all out in the open. There's no secret at YC. People think you get into YC and it's like Hogwarts. You're going to discover magic potions and sorcerers and whatever. You get at YC and it's exactly like you expected because so everything is on the YouTube channel, everything is on the YC website, like the playbooks are there. So, and the playbooks are very good because they're so simple. Make something people want. It seems almost dumb, but it's so profound and so genius. So I think it's almost always a good idea to follow YC's way of building and YC's philosophy, because I think it will always be a good idea in business to just make something people want. Now, I know some people, there's so many founders that find excuses related to YC or not, but like, I will only go full time if I make it to YC. That's a bad way of doing it. So many founders say, I've built it, now I need to fundraise in order to sell it. That's the biggest, that's the wrong way of going after it. You should figure out a way to sell it with or without fundraising, and that's how investors are actually going to be interested in you. So, in those kinds of instances, YC could become a clutch or, a bad thing to follow, but I would say 99% of the time, you can't really get wrong just because it's so simple and sensical, and it just makes sense for almost everyone in almost every case.
Oh, Gabriel, it has been such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I'm shocked we covered 30 minutes. I feel like we covered 2 hours. We'll look forward to having an opportunity to do this again, hopefully with you.
Yeah.
In the meantime, what's the best way to get a hold of you if somebody wants us to reach out?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I had a blast as well. I really had a great time and happy to do it again anytime you want. I'm very easy to find on both LinkedIn and X. Type my name, Gabriel Jarrosson. I'm the only one.
Perfect. And we'll have your links to it below. Gabriel, it was a pleasure. Ciao.
Thank you so much. Bye.